On 26 May 1871, Sultan Ali of Perak died. According to Malay adat, custom, the body of a dead sultan cannot be buried until his successor has been installed. The funeral ceremony and the installation ceremony are the same ceremony. Death and succession are a single ritual act. The man who should have succeeded was Raja Abdullah, the Raja Muda, the heir apparent. He had held this title since 1865. By every legal and customary standard, he was next in line. But Abdullah was not there. The chiefs waited 1 day, 5 days, 10 days. They sent messengers. Abdullah was in Lower Perak, in territory friendly to him. To reach the funeral at Sayong, he would have to travel through Senggang, the territory of Raja Yusuf, his enemy. He feared assassination on the journey. He also knew he was unpopular in Upper Perak, so he stayed away. He calculated that his title, Raja Muda, heir apparent, would protect his claim even without his physical presence. 32 days, the body of Sultan Ali lay unburied. On the 33rd day, the chiefs proceeded without Abdullah. They installed Raja Ismail, the Raja Bendahara, as the new sultan. The Daulat transferred. The regalia passed to new hands. The funeral and installation happened as a single act, as custom required. Abdullah arrived too late. He was no longer heir to anything. What had Abdullah misunderstood? He thought his title was a fact that existed independently of ceremony. He thought Raja Muda was a status he possessed, a property attached to his person, something that would survive his absence from any particular ritual. He was wrong. In Malay political cosmology, the Sultan is not merely a political office. The Sultan carries Daulat, a sacred sovereignty rooted in Hindu-Buddhist concepts of divine kingship. Daulat is not a metaphor. It is a cosmic force, an aura of power that emanates from the ruler, sanctifies his palace, and animates his regalia. And Daulat is not inherited automatically. It must be transferred through ceremony. The installation ritual does not recognize a new sultan, it creates one. Without the ceremony, there is no sultan, only a man with a claim. Abdullah's claim meant nothing. Claims are not Daulat. The ceremony that could have made him sultan happened without him. The ceremony did what ceremonies do. It created reality. It created a different sultan. This is the first principle. Ceremony does not represent reality. Ceremony creates reality. Abdullah made a categorical error. He treated ceremony as decorative, as a formal recognition of something that already existed underneath. He thought there was a real succession that the funeral would merely ratify. There was no real succession underneath. The ceremony was all there was. Abdullah did not accept his fate. For 3 years, he fought politically, diplomatically, through alliances with Chinese mining factions, through appeals to anyone who might help him. In 1873, he found his helper, the British. The timing was fortunate. Sir Andrew Clark had just arrived as the new governor of the Straits Settlements, carrying fresh instructions from London. The Colonial Office under Lord Kimberley had reversed decades of non-intervention policy. British merchants were losing money because of chaos in the Malay states. The Larut Wars between Chinese mining factions, succession disputes disrupted tin supplies. Kimberley told Clark to investigate whether it would be advisable to appoint a British officer to reside in any of the Malay states. Abdullah's appeal landed on Clark's desk like a gift. Working through intermediaries, Tan Kim Cheng, a Singapore merchant, and an unnamed English businessman, Abdullah sent Clark a letter. The letter asked for British recognition of his claim to the throne. It asked for help ending the Larut Wars, and it contained one fatal phrase. Abdullah requested a man of sufficient abilities to show him a good system of government. Clark seized the opportunity. He convened a conference at Pangkor Island in January 1874. Chinese faction leaders attended, Malay chiefs attended. On the 20th of January, aboard HMS Pluto, Raja Abdullah signed the Pangkor Treaty. The treaty recognized Abdullah as the legitimate Sultan of Perak. It ended the Larut Wars. It settled the succession dispute in Abdullah's favor, and it contained one sentence: the Sultan receive and provide a suitable residence for a British officer to be called resident, who shall be accredited to his court, and whose advice must be asked and acted upon on all questions other than those touching Malay religion and custom. Advice that must be acted upon is not advice, it is command wearing a ceremonial mask. Did Abdullah understand what he had signed? Almost certainly not. At first, the treaty was written in English. A Malay translation was prepared by Frank Swettenham, then 24 years old. How precisely advice that must be asked and acted upon rendered in Malay remains unclear. But Abdullah understood quickly enough. Shortly after the signing, he wrote to his former rival, Raja Ismail, "Should you consent to my installation as Sultan, Perak will be given over to the English, for my words have caused me to become much indebted to them. Should I ask for the regalia in the presence of Mr. Birch, do not consent to give them up." He had traded his kingdom for his crown. He knew it. He could not undo it. Here is the second irony. Abdullah's solution to ceremonial failure was more ceremony. He had lost the throne because he missed the funeral, because he failed to participate in the constitutive ritual. His solution was the Pangkor Treaty, another constitutive ritual, a ceremony that would, he hoped, restore what the funeral had taken. But he still did not understand ceremony. He thought the treaty would repair, would give him back what he had lost. Ceremony does not repair. Ceremony only creates. The treaty did not restore Abdullah to his former position. It created something entirely new, a sultan who was sultan by treaty, not sultan by succession, a resident whose advice was actually command, a system of parallel sovereignties, ceremonial and operational, running on separate tracks. Abdullah wanted to go back. The ceremony took him somewhere else entirely, and he could not control where it took him. Sir Andrew Clark designed the residency system as an administrative convenience. Direct rule would have been expensive. British administrators at every level, paid from London, responsible for everything that went wrong. The residency system was cheaper. One officer paid from local revenues ruling through advice. It was also more defensible internationally. Britain could claim, quite truthfully, that Perak remained a sovereign Malay state. The Sultan sat on his throne. The resident merely advised. The legal fiction protected Britain from accusations of annexation, but Clark had built something more elegant than he knew. He had built a machine for invisible empire. The genius of advice that must be followed is that it denies its own existence. Direct rule announces itself, creates a clear target for resistance, requires constant assertion of authority. A system that rules while claiming only to advise, that system is self-concealing. The colonized cannot rebel against what technically is not there. Clark designed this machine in January 1874. In November 1874, he appointed J.W.W. Birch as the first resident of Perak. It was the worst possible choice. Birch had served in Ceylon. He had administrative experience. He was efficient, reformist, convinced of the civilizing mission of the British Empire. He saw debt slavery in Perak and wanted it abolished. He saw chaotic taxation and wanted it systematized. He saw a sultan who could not control his own chiefs and wanted to establish proper authority. All of this was, by British standards, admirable. Birch was a competent colonial administrator. But Birch did not understand the machine Clark had built. The residency system required a specific kind of operator, someone willing to subordinate reality to ritual, to possess power while performing deference, to rule while claiming only to advise. The system's survival depended on maintaining the fiction. Birch refused to maintain the fiction. He could not speak Malay. He did not live near the Sultan. He refused to share a kampong with Abdullah. He issued proclamations in his own name. He took over tax collection from the chiefs. He announced the abolition of slavery without consultation. He burned the homes of those who defied him. He ordered the surrender of arms and slaves. When the chiefs protested that this was not advice, Birch was unmoved. He reportedly said, "It concerns us little what were the old customs of the country, nor do I think they are worthy of any consideration." Birch was not wrong. He was the ruler. The treaty made him the ruler. He was simply acting like what he actually was. Clark saw the disaster unfolding. In March 1875, he wrote, I am very much annoyed with Birch and the heads over heels way in which he does things. He and I will come to sorrow yet, if he does not mind. 8 months later, Birch was dead. On the 21st of July, 1875, Sultan Abdullah convened a meeting at Durian Sabatang. The chiefs gathered. They discussed what to do about Birch. They considered poison. They rejected it. The Maharaja Layla, head of the 8 lesser chiefs, ruler of the Pasir Salak district, offered to do the work himself. I could get 100 men, he said. Abdullah asked where the men were. Don't bother yourself about that, the Maharaja Layla replied. Whenever wanted, I will have them ready. The Sultan delivered papers to several chiefs authorizing the killing. Arms and gunpowder were purchased from Penang. In August, the conspirators held 3 consecutive nights of Main Berhantu, spirit seances, at Abdullah's house discussing plans. On the 2nd of November 1875, the second day of Hari Raya, Birch traveled to Pasir Salak to post proclamations announcing a new taxation system. He moored his boat, the SS Dragon, on the riverbank below the Maharaja Layla's house. Around 10 in the morning, he went to the floating bathhouse to bathe. The Maharaja Layla's followers surrounded the bathhouse. Sapuntam, a peasant farmer who worked the Maharaja Layla's rice fields, thrust a spear through the wall. Birch emerged, wounded, into the water. They cut him down with swords. Why was Birch killed? The Malaysian national narrative frames this as anti-colonial resistance, the Malay chiefs rising against British imperialism. The historian Chea Boon Keng has challenged this interpretation, arguing that Maharaja Layla's actions must be understood within the context of Malay feudal rivalries. The Maharaja Layla had been humiliated when he was excluded from the Pangkor negotiations. He had personal grievances. The murder was as much about intra-Malay politics as about resistance to Britain. Both interpretations miss something. Birch was killed because he told the truth. He acted like the ruler because he was the ruler. He refused to perform consultation because consultation was a fiction. He treated advice as command because that is what the treaty made it. He was accurate. He was honest about the nature of British power, and the system killed him for it. Here is the third principle. The system requires dishonesty to function. Clark's machine depended on everyone agreeing to maintain the fiction. The Sultan would pretend to be sovereign, the resident would pretend to advise, the chiefs would pretend to be consulted, everyone would perform their roles, and the performance would create a reality in which British rule was invisible, deniable, and therefore tolerable. Birch broke the agreement. He refused to perform. He said, in effect, there is no Malay sovereignty here, only British power wearing a mask. He was right, and they killed him for being right. The British response was overwhelming. Troops arrived from Hong Kong, from India. The Perak War lasted into 1876. Pasir Salak was stormed. The Maharaja Layla was captured and hanged. Sultan Abdullah was deposed and exiled to the Seychelles, along with other implicated chiefs. But here is what the British did not do. They did not annex Perak. They had every justification. A British official had been murdered. They had won a war. Direct rule would have been the obvious response. Instead, they maintained the fiction. They installed a new sultan, Raja Yusuf, chosen specifically because he had not been involved in the murder conspiracy. They appointed a new resident. They kept the system Clark had designed. Why? Because they had learned from Birch's death. The lesson was not that the residency system had failed. The lesson was that Birch had operated it incorrectly. The machine worked. It just required the right operator. In April 1877, Hugh Lowe arrived in Perak as the 4th resident. He was 53 years old. He had spent 25 years in Labuan, a forgotten colonial backwater, doing almost nothing. He spoke fluent Malay. He had no ambitions, no impatience, no reformist zeal. He was, by every conventional measure, a mediocrity. He was also the only man who understood what the residency system actually was. Low moved to Kuala Kangsar, near the Sultan's residence. He visited Raja Yusuf almost every day. They talked for hours about land policy, about governance, about how a sultan should conduct himself. Low never issued orders. He advised, he consulted, he performed deference elaborately and consistently, and he did everything Birch had done. He abolished slavery gradually over 8 years with compensation to slave owners. He reformed taxation. He systematized revenue collection. He built the first railway in the Malay Peninsula. He cleared an 800,000 Straits dollar debt and left Perak with a 1.5 million surplus. He transformed Perak from a bankrupt state simmering with resentment into a model of colonial administration. How? Low understood the first principle: ceremony creates reality. He grasped that his power existed only insofar as he performed consultation. The Sultan's sovereignty existed only insofar as it was performed. Neither was more real than the other. Both had to be maintained simultaneously. He did not try to peel back the ceremony to find the reality underneath. He knew there was nothing underneath. Low created the Perak State Council, an advisory body including the Sultan, the resident Malay chiefs, and Chinese mining leaders. The council met regularly. It discussed policy. It gave the appearance of collective deliberation. In practice, Low decided everything. But the ceremony of consultation was maintained. The chiefs were consulted. The Sultan was advised. Everyone performed their roles. And because the performance was maintained, the reality it created was stable. No one had to confront the naked fact of British rule. No one had to rebel against something that officially did not exist. Birch had said, "It concerns us little what were the old customs of the country." Frank Swetnam, who would later become the first resident general of the Federated Malay States, wrote the operating manual that Birch had never read. To understand the Malay, you must live in his country, speak his language, respect his faith, study his interests, share his questions, and sympathize with his troubles. This was not sentiment, it was technical instruction. This is how you operate the machine. Hugh Low proved the model worked. Within 2 decades, the residency system spread across the peninsula. Selangor and Sungai Ujong accepted residents in 1874, the same year as Perak. Pahang followed in 1888. In 1895, these 4 states were combined into the Federated Malay States, with Swetnam as the first resident general. In 1909, the Anglo-Siamese Treaty brought Kedah, Perlis, Kelantan, and Terengganu under British influence. In 1914, even Johor, the proudly independent state ruled by the Anglophile Sultan Abu Bakr, accepted a British advisor. By the First World War, the entire Malay Peninsula was under British control. Yet formally, none of it was British territory. Every state remained a sovereign Malay sultanate. Every sultan sat on his throne. Every resident merely advised. The fiction had become a machine for empire. It could replicate endlessly, absorbing new territories without ever announcing what it was. Empires end. In February 1942, British Malaya ended with shocking abruptness. Lieutenant General Arthur Percival surrendered Singapore to the Japanese after a 70-day campaign. 85,000 British and Commonwealth troops became prisoners of war. Churchill called it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. For 3.5 years, the Japanese occupied Malaya. The occupation was brutal, but it was also revelatory. Frantz Fanon would later write that colonial power depends on a mystique of invincibility. When the colonized see the colonizer run, surrender, beg, the spell breaks. It could never be fully restored. In 1946, the British returned with a new plan. The Malayan Union would be different. After the chaos of war, after the humiliation of surrender, Britain would rule directly. No more fictions, no more parallel sovereignties. The sultans would become constitutional figureheads. Sovereignty would transfer explicitly to the British Crown. Citizenship would be extended equally to all races. It was, in a sense, honest. For the first time, Britain would say plainly what the residency system had always denied. We rule here. Sir Harold MacMichael travelled to each sultan and obtained their signatures through persuasion, through implied threats of being accused of Japanese collaboration, through the pressure that a returning victorious empire could bring to bear. On 1st April 1946, the Malayan Union came into existence. Sir Edward Gent was appointed governor. Not a single Malay sultan attended his installation. The Malays revolted. Not with arms, with ceremony. They wore white mourning bands around their heads, signifying grief for the death of their sultan's sovereignty. 41 Malay associations gathered in Kuala Lumpur. Dato' On bin Ja'far united them into a single organization, the United Malays National Organization, UMNO. The protests were enormous. Tens of thousands marched in Kelantan, Kedah, Johor. Placards read, "British government betrays trust. Allow Malays to exist in this world. We want justice." And the Malays won. Within 2 years, the Malayan Union was scrapped. The Federation of Malaya replaced it, restoring the Sultan's sovereignty, tightening citizenship requirements, returning to the old structure of British advice and Malay ceremony. What had happened? The British tried to drop the mask. They tried to speak plainly, to rule honestly, to end the fiction that had structured their empire for 70 years, and they discovered they could not. The ceremony had become stronger than its creators. The fictional sovereignty of the sultans had become over 7 decades of performance, a reality that could not be abolished by fiat. The Malays mobilized not despite the fiction, but to defend it. UMNO was born to protect the hollow sovereignty the Pangkor Treaty had created. This is the 4th principle. Ceremony, once established, captures everyone, including those who created it. The British could not kill their own fiction. They had performed it too long. Too many people had invested in it. Malay sultans, Malay chiefs, the entire administrative structure that had grown up around the pretense of advice. The ceremony had generated stakeholders. The stakeholders defended the ceremony. The mask had fused to the face. There was no way to remove it. Hugh Lowe proved the model worked. Within 2 decades, the residency system spread across the peninsula. Selangor and Sungai Ujong accepted residents in 1874, the same year as Perak. Pahang followed in 1888. In 1895, these 4 states were combined into the Federated Malay States, with Swettenham as the first resident general. In 1909, the Anglo-Siamese Treaty brought Kedah, Perlis, Kelantan, and Terengganu under British influence. In 1914, even Johor, the proudly independent state ruled by the Anglophile Sultan Abu Bakr, accepted a British advisor. By the First World War, the entire Malay Peninsula was under British control. Yet formally, none of it was British territory. Every state remained a sovereign Malay sultanate. Every sultan sat on his throne. Every resident merely advised. The fiction had become a machine for empire. It could replicate endlessly, absorbing new territories without ever announcing what it was. Let us return to Abdullah. He spent the rest of his life in exile, first in the Seychelles, later in Singapore and Penang, before eventually being allowed to return to Perak. He died in Kuala Kangsar in 1922 at the age of 80. In the Seychelles, exiled Sultan Abdullah had adopted a French melody as the Perak royal anthem, a tune called La Rosalie, popular on the island of Mahé. When Malaya became independent in 1957, a committee searched for a national anthem. They considered 514 submissions from around the world. They chose Abdullah's tune. Today, Negaraku, Malaysia's national anthem, plays at every official function, every sporting event, every school assembly. The melody was selected, the committee noted, for its traditional flavor. It is a French cafe song chosen by an exiled sultan who had lost his throne because he missed a funeral, regained it by signing away his sovereignty, lost it again when his resident was murdered, and spent 4 decades dreaming of Perak. Abdullah's ceremonial failure created the residency system. The residency system created the federated Malay states. The federated Malay states created the structure the Japanese inherited and the British restored. The restoration created UMNO. UMNO created modern Malaysia. The 9 sultans still sit on their thrones. The Conference of Rulers still meets. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the rotating king, is installed with the same ceremony used since 1957, wearing the same regalia, hearing the same cry of Daulat Tuanku. The state council that Hugh Low created in 1877 was the ancestor of every Malaysian state legislature. The advice system he perfected was the model for British colonial administration across Southeast Asia. Abdullah missed a funeral because he was afraid. His absence cost him the throne. His solution, the Pangkor Treaty, cost him his kingdom. His attempt to retrieve what ceremony had taken created a ceremony that outlived him, outlived the British Empire, and continues today. He wanted to be king. He became a king, but only as a performer. He was trapped inside ceremony forever. The resident wanted power. He got power, but only by performing powerlessness. He was trapped inside ceremony too. The chiefs wanted to end British interference. Their ceremonial act of murder guaranteed permanent interference. Trapped. The British wanted to simplify administration. Their ceremony of union created UMNO, the force that would end their rule. Trapped. Everyone who believed there was something more real than ceremony was destroyed by ceremony. Everyone who tried to escape the performance was captured by it. The only survivors were those who understood. There is no escape. There is no reality outside the ritual. There is no face beneath the mask. You can only choose your performance. Daulat Tuanku.